Yeah, I think if we're putting the quarterback aside, because obviously that's the whole reason this team is 3-0 right now. I think for me, the way the defensive line has played the last couple of weeks, specifically last week against Carson Wentz, has been the other big key. Because I think I was not expecting the defensive line to have. I would question whether or not they'd have a big impact this year.
Jody McDonald, John McMullen, here on Birds 365, joined by John Stolnis from Bleeding Green Nation, one of our favorite guests when he hops aboard. John, it's been a couple of weeks or more since we last had you on. You knew the Eagles were going to be 3-0 and be in the argument for the best team in the NFL after 3 weeks, right? You had that all scoped out.
I've been screaming that at the top of my lungs since before the draft,
Yeah.
Jody. I think I'm well established on that for sure. Yeah.
And also Jalen Hurts would be an MVP candidate.
No doubt.
We're all ground floor on that.
Yeah. Everybody knows this. This is canon.
Yeah. It absolutely is. What has been the biggest surprise for your team besides the quarterback? We'll take the quarterback out of the equation. Yeah. What has surprised you most about how good this? Because let's be honest, John, they've been dominant, and the Detroit game, I think people underestimated the environment, but man, they closed it out with that 4-minute offense, and then it's been lights out over the past 2 games.
Yeah, I think if we're putting the quarterback aside, because obviously that's the whole reason this team is 3-0 right now. I think for me, the way the defensive line has played the last couple of weeks, specifically last week against Carson Wentz, has been the other big key. Because I think I was not expecting the defensive line to have. I would question whether or not they'd have a big impact this year. And I think over these last couple of weeks, they've really turned up. I mean, Brandon Graham is Defensive Player of the Week this past week for the first time in his career, which is crazy to think about. But the way that Jonathan Gannon's defense has played the last couple of weeks, I think, has been the second biggest surprise on the team. And really, the offense has struggled a little bit in the second half of these last 2 games. I know Sirianni talked about taking his foot off the gas in week 2, and he really didn't need to, keep the pedal down. But then last week, maybe trying to go too far in the other direction and not recognizing Washington's defense was adjusting to the long ball. And so I know he said he needs to find a middle ground there, but the defense really made it so that those second half, I'll call them struggles for lack of a better word, but because of those second half lulls that the offense has had, it hasn't mattered. Neither of those games ever really felt like they were in doubt because the defense was so suffocating against a Vikings offense that was really great. I mean, I still think Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins and Dalvin Cook can do a lot of damage during the rest of the season. And then last week against Carson Wentz, you can't tell me that somewhere deep in the recesses of your mind, you didn't envision Carson Wentz having a good game against the Eagles. The worst case scenario, the pessimistic little guy that lives in your mind, that was there for all of us, I think, to some degree. And they just never let it happen.
And I thought Carson might have put up some numbers. I just didn't think it was going to be a winning effort. He didn't even put up the numbers. So the Eagles pass rush was that good. And to think they're doing all of that without Derek Barnett, just shocking.
I know, really. Can you believe that's the biggest surprise? Yeah.
All right, John, the fact that the 3-0 start has gone above and beyond what most of us saw coming certainly has boosted the confidence of this team. I got to believe the confidence in that room right now is off the charts. Should there be any concern of that they maybe are smelling themselves just a little bit with this 3-0 start and being power ranked some places, the number 1 team in the National Football League? Would that be a concern of yours if you were in Nick Sirianni's shoes this week?
That's what I was worried about last week. And I wrote an article for bleedinggreennation.com this week talking about why I thought the Washington win was more impressive than the Monday night win over the Vikings, because coming off of that Monday night win against Minnesota, that's exactly what was happening. Jalen Hurts is suddenly at the top of all the MVP conversation. You've got the Eagles now in the top 5 of the power rankings. They're right there with the Buccaneers atop the NFC. You're hearing all of these glowing stories. Everybody on the NFL Network is talking about the Eagles, and Jalen Hurts and the offense went out and put the pedal down in the first half against the Commanders, and the defense were a bunch of rampaging beasts out there in Washington. That to me was the sign that this is not a pop-up team that surprises you for a few weeks like the Cardinals last year that will quickly fade. I think that because you have a quarterback that is so dedicated to getting better each and every week, I don't think you're going to see a situation where Jalen Hurts is smelling himself. And as the quarterback goes, so oftentimes the rest of the team goes. I think Nick Sirianni playing that Kobe Bryant message with the Paul Gasol thing from the Redeem Team documentary, I think was inspired. I mean, it's a good choice to do that in that week. Just to remind everybody to not go easy on Carson, because some of you may have been friends with him in the past. And I thought the way they came out in Washington without suffering a letdown on a short week against an opponent you could look past told me that I don't think this team is going to do what you were talking about, Jody, and that's smell themselves and think too highly of themselves and play down to their opponent.
Yeah, and this week it's Tiger Woods in competitiveness.
Right.
So Nick keeps going down that route. We'll see how long that shelf life is. I want to rewind to the first question because he gave an interesting answer, because I'm in one camp and most people are in the other camp. Like, I don't even pay attention to these second half struggles because Jody knows, I think it's human nature. They were never threatened in these games. You have other people saying you got to score in the second. You got to score. Probably it's somewhere in between. I should probably be a little bit more concerned. But where are you on that sort of needle? Very concerned, little concerned. Where are you?
A little concerned. I would like to have seen, and they would have added a field goal in the Vikings game in the second half if it hadn't been blocked. And they just, I think, you add a couple of field goals in the second half of each of these games, and you just give yourself that much breathing room. I think there were a couple of times against Washington in the second half when they got a short field and you realized that this were a touchdown here. It's a 10-point game, and you give a struggling team a little bit of life with a quarter and a half left. That's still a game you can lose. And maybe at that point, the Eagles offense gets more serious and they really embark. So game script has a lot to do with it, where the score is, the time, and all that kind of stuff. And I get that. There was no urgency really in the second half of these last two games for the Eagles to have to really push hard. But I would like to see them add on. And that's, I think, maybe the last step this team needs to take is have that killer mentality offensively to be able to figure out, here's how we're going to close down this game. We're not even going to give you guys a shot at letting a blocked field goal return for a touchdown, which almost happened in that Minnesota game. We're not going to even allow that to be a possibility where that could hurt us. And so it's a little bit of a concern. It's not a big concern. It's something I think they'll fix.
John, I want to back it up to April, where the NFL schedule comes out. And we all, here's the Eagles schedule. Get out your pencils and give me W's and L's over the 17 games. At home against the Jaguars. This was a W in a capital letter, and you don't need a pencil. Give me a pen. We'll put the W next to this one. Sorry, Dougie P. There's no way we're losing to Jags at home. And, Jacksonville's not bad. 2-1, good start. Putting up gaudy offensive numbers. How much better are the Jags at this stage than we thought when the schedule came out in April?
Yeah, it's why I like doing the schedule thing at the beginning of the offseason, and you put in the W's and the L's, but you go into it realizing that once the season starts, there's going to probably be 3 or 4 teams on your schedule that you thought were going to be easy wins that turn out to be difficult. And there are probably going to be 2, 3, 4 games that you thought, I really don't like our chances in this one. And they end up being games that you handle comfortably, because you never know what a team's going to look like once the season starts and the games matter and injuries start to happen. So this Jacksonville offense is so much better with Doug Peterson. One of my bold predictions I wrote about for Bleeding Green Nation was I predicted Peterson as coach of the year, because you had him, Trevor. You had
so
him,
did I, John. So did I.
Well, here's the thing. Urban Meyer was so bad last year that he made everybody forget how hyped Trevor Lawrence was coming out of college. And so Doug Peterson comes in here with essentially a blank slate. He's got to undo some of the damage Urban Meyer did, but he just brings we've seen what he did with Carson Wentz. We saw how he was able to transform the offense with Nick Foles, how he, the work he has done in his career with quarterbacks. And you just had to think he's going to have a positive influence on Trevor Lawrence. He's going to bring a stabilizing force to an offense that has some skill at the position. He's using Christian Kirk tremendously in this offense. And we talked about that as being a ridiculous free agent signing. It's looking like it's going to be a very good free agent signing for Jacksonville, because Doug knows how to scheme things up. And so you've got a quarterback, you got a coach who knows how to use a quarterback, and you've got a very talented quarterback who really just needed someone to help unleash his abilities. And so Jacksonville's legit offensively. I think they're a legitimate worry for this defense this Sunday.
Yeah. I think over the past 2 weeks, you can argue the best teams in football have been the Eagles and the Jags. I mean, the Jags waxed Indy. I think it was 24-0. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jody. And then they beat the Chargers 38-10. They just really destroyed the Chargers. So they're playing very well coming in here.
I kind of put the Dolphins in there too, seeing as they beat the Ravens in Baltimore.
Yeah, I know you're a big Dolphin, but they haven't been as impressive.
The already champion of the world, Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, which is the reason why they're not getting style points. You know how important style points are, Jody. You need style points as well.
Coming back from 28 points down against the Ravens with not style points.
Speaking of style points, first week you had 15 missed tackles for the Eagles. Weeks 2 and 3, they gave up 15 points. Unfortunately, 2 of those were due to a safety. So technically 13 for the defense. They keep talking about this nebulous standard, John. The standard. We haven't lived up to our standard.
Mm-hmm.
Is it possible to live up to the standard that has been this good? Because I got in trouble this week. Jody will tell you. A bunch of viewers got upset at me because I said this is not sustainable. And what I was talking about is the Pro Football Focus grades. The Eagles are the best overall team. They're the best offense. They're the best passing offense, the best pass blocking offense, the best receiving offense. I just mentioned the defense giving them 13 points over 2 weeks. Is this sustainable?
Probably not at this level, but I think right now you do see sometimes a team will have a season where they just play such complimentary football that they go on a run and have a special season. This feels like it could be one of those seasons. I think we need more than 3 games of Jonathan Gannon showing that he can shut down quarterbacks. What we need to see is Jonathan Gannon shutting down a top-level quarterback, or at least really holding a top-level quarterback.
Trevor Lawrence a top-level quarterback? If he shuts down Trevor Lawrence, what are we saying?
I don't think that answers that question necessarily. I think Trevor Lawrence is a very good quarterback. But I think what I'm talking about is one of I don't think you'd put Trevor Lawrence in the top 10 of NFL quarterbacks right now. And that's kind of what I would like to see this defense do is you may not be able to shut down a top 10 quarterback entirely, but hold a top 10 quarterback in check. Prevent them from doing what they did last year with top quarterbacks when they would come in and complete 85% of their passes and go and put together very easy 12-play, 13-play drives that ate up 8 minutes of clock. And I think that's what we need to see. I think obviously Trevor Lawrence is playing very well. And if they do shut him down, that's yet another good indication that Jonathan Gannon has figured out how to use the different pieces that he has. He's got so many different players, especially on that defensive line rotation to move in and out of. It may have just taken a week for him to kind of figure out how he's going to utilize everybody. But I do think this can be a top 5 defense, a top 7 defense in the NFL. They seem to have enough on the defensive line. The linebacker play has improved tremendously. And you have Darius Slay, James Bradbury, and Avonte Maddox playing at a very high level right now against good wide receivers. That alone will force the quarterback to hold the ball for an extra second, which can get you home and allow you to only give up 13 points over the course of 2 weeks. So it may not be sustainable to the level that it is, but I do think this could be a top 5, top 7 defense. But I'll hold off on that until I see them take down a really good quarterback.
Would you put Jalen Hurts into the top 10 quarterbacks in the league?
Right now he is. I mean, I think you can't talk about him as a legitimate MVP candidate.
I'm just trying to understand why you wouldn't put Lawrence in, but you would Jalen Hurts. They had similar years last year, and right now their quarterback rankings are almost exactly the same. Passer ratings. Why the Hurts love and not ready to get that elevated that fast with Lawrence?
I think I look at Hurts and the way he took the team to the playoffs last year as putting him a little bit ahead of Trevor Lawrence. And I hear that because Trevor Lawrence, again, had Urban Meyer as his head coach. If he has a competent head coach, he's probably further in my mind than I have him. So that's a fair point. I know that he's got, I think, the number 7 passer rating in the NFL right now coming into this game. I guess I just want to see a little bit more from Trevor Lawrence before I put him into the top 10. And, I think people are talking about Jalen Hurts as an MVP candidate. I haven't heard a whole lot of scuttlebutt about Trevor Lawrence in that same vein. Because of what Jalen Hurts can give you on the ground as well as through the air. And I think his performances have been more dynamic so far this season. But it's a fair, I can't say that he's definitely not, given how some of the other top quarterbacks have played so far this year. Yeah.
One of them, and here's where I'll say, John, I know everybody was upset last year at the 80-90% guys on the Eagles defense, and rightfully so. If anybody was going to throw for 89, it's Kirk Cousins. I mean, he throws for 70%. It'll probably end up at 70%, and they shut him down. So was that not a big enough time? I get what you're saying. It's not Tom Brady. I mean, it's not Patrick Mahomes. It's not. But I mean, as far as that completion percentage, that's a guy. I mean, he's been doing it for almost a decade, anywhere from 65 to over 70%. And that showed me a ton of improvement.
Yeah, and I think Kirk Cousins is one of those tricky quarterbacks to figure out exactly what he is, because he does put up some big numbers. He does put up some gaudy statistics, but he also struggles in primetime games. He struggles against good defenses, and I think that's what the Eagles have. So, yeah, I mean, I get it. I think I think Cousins was one of those key tests, especially with Justin Jefferson. The way they were able to shut him down in that game was eye opening. So yeah, I think you're right. I think the Cousins test was a good test, and maybe my expectations or my standards are a little too high with this defense.
By the way, guys, I feel this has become a daily thing. The daily award update.
Ooh,
Jalen Hurts, NFC Offensive Player of the Month.
The month.
Wow.
Offensive Player of the Month.
And deserved and well earned.
Yeah.
So we give the quarterback of the Eagles the props he's earned here. All right. Doug Peterson coming back to town, John Stolnis. Will there be a video tribute played for him?
I think there should be. I think they probably will. The Eagles know how to do this pretty well. I think they like to honor their past. And despite the fact of how things ended and them scapegoating Doug Peterson at the end of the 2020 season, I think they will recognize his contributions to, putting in maybe the greatest head coaching performance in Super Bowl history against Bill Belichick back in Super Bowl 52, and for everything he did for the organization, bringing Jeff Lurie his only Super Bowl Vince Lombardi trophy. I think so. And it's deserved. I love Doug Peterson, and I think you'd be hard pressed to find any Eagles fan that would say bad things about Doug Peterson. And most, I think, understand the way he left was not ideal. That's not the way you would want to move on from a Super Bowl winning head coach. I mean, it's not like he won it 10 years ago. It was still pretty fresh in everybody's mind. So I'm still
amazed.
I'm still shocked. Yep. I'm still shocked he's not here. And I'm not at all surprised he's having success with Jacksonville. So no, I think they'll have a video tribute, and I think they should.
I think I love that word because I've used it a bunch of times. Jeffrey Lurie got very scapegoaty after winning the Super Bowl. And the expectations were so high. I don't think I've ever gotten your thoughts on Doug Peterson leaving. One of the amazing things to me to this day, John, the Eagles didn't believe in Doug Peterson when it came to his assistant coaches. Mm-hmm. And Nick Sirianni comes in unproven, off the radar for the most part, out of left field. And I'm not saying he has a ton of autonomy, but he had more autonomy from day one with his coaching staff than Doug Peterson ever did. Where does that disconnect come from, do you think?
I think with the coaching decisions Doug Peterson wanted to make, he wanted to promote guys who were already here, who I think Jeff Lurie and Howie Roseman just had seen enough of to not want to be put into more prominent positions. Whereas with Nick Sirianni, he's bringing in people who are new. They've never seen these guys before. They don't have a history or a track record with the folks that are coming in. So I think there is some kind of there's bias there for sure with Doug Peterson's guys, because granted, I think the track record of a lot of Doug Peterson's assistant coaches during the last couple of years was not great. And the guys that he wanted to promote, I wasn't wild about the idea of some of the promotions that he was considering, that he wanted to push through. But I do think the Eagles used that as a reason to move on from him. And I think if you're Doug Peterson, you've won a Super Bowl, you have taken your team to the playoffs the 3 straight years before the 4-win season. Any other head coach who's done that has the autonomy to choose his coaching staff. And I still am amazed that the Eagles did not give him that opportunity and that level of privilege. I whether it was the right decision, whether he was going to make the right decisions or wrong decisions with his staff, I don't know that I'm qualified enough to say that. We'll never know whether it would have been the right decision or not, but I think they used it as a reason to move on from him. And I still don't understand why.
All right, I'll apologize in advance because this will probably tick off a whole bunch of our Eagle fan streamers who are on here. But as almost a tip of the cap to Howie Roseman, one of the things Howie does well is he can both narrow focus and watch the big picture, make moves that are going to help the team immediately, but also keep in mind that he hopes to be the general manager. The Eagles are going to be here for decades on decades on decades. So I'm going to ask you, John Stolnis, a question about the future. I know they got a game against the Jaguars. They can get to 4-0. They might be the only 4-0 team left in the NFL by this time on Sunday. But I also want to keep an eye on the future. If you had the chance as an Eagle organization to protect one of your two coordinators from being poached as a head coach for another team next year, which one would you protect? The offensive coordinator or the defensive coordinator?
Shane Steichen. For sure. For me, it's not a hesitation. I think that you've seen the play calling, especially in the first half of these games, that they just seem to be in such a rhythm. He seems to be in that groove that we would see Doug Peterson get into sometimes, with how mixing the run plays and the pass plays and knowing when to dial up to go deep and knowing when to just kind of take the 7 yards, 10 yards when they give you to scheme up splash plays without having to have the ball in the air for 30, 40 yards. I think Shane Steichen probably will be here this year and then move on and get a head coaching job. And maybe this is some residual frustration from Jonathan Gannon last year that I just haven't fully gotten on board with his system, despite how great they've played the last 2 weeks. But I need to see more before I would hold Jonathan Gannon before Shane Steichen at this point.
Yeah. By the way, I think 90% of Eagles fans would agree with John.
Why are you being light at 90, John?
Yeah,
might be more like 98.
I would go the other direction.
Same here.
You know,
really,
mainly because I do think, you know, Gannon's so respected around the league. That's part of it. But the bigger part to me is I really don't think a lot of, and I'm not saying you, John, but a lot of fans don't know how hard it is to play defense in the modern NFL. Like, you know, you can talk about the Ravens defense with Ray Lewis. You can talk about the 85 Bears. And I think everybody wants this dominating and even Tampa Bay with Warren Sapp and Tony Dungy. I don't think those exist anymore. I think it's so difficult. And then I look at it from this perspective. I did my top 25 Eagles players before the season started, just best pure football players. And my number one, Jody knows, and not many people agree with me, but I think he's just a phenomenal football player, and that's Dallas Goedert. And then it was A.J. Brown, and then it was Lane Johnson, and then it was Jason Kelce. Top four. Before I even got to the defense, and I'd have to look up. I forget who I had at number 5, but I know those were my top 4. All offensive players. Might have been Slay. I think I had Slay at 5, so that's where it started. I don't know. I don't get the Jonathan Gannon angst, and I think it comes from the lack of context. I think, and this is all fan bases. I'm not. They hyper focus on their teams. They don't realize what's going on other places. Everybody gets gashed in this league. Everybody blows coverages. The fact that you can go over a 3-game span, 2-game span even, and give up 13 points in this league, in this era, that's pretty stinking good.
I'll tell you why I would go protection of Gannon. Because if you lose Steichen, you've still got the head coach, who's an offensive play caller, who gave him up last year in the midst of a year where it wasn't working. And I'm not trying to in any way diminish what Steichen did last year and has done this year. It's pretty damn good, and I think he will be in the coaching carousel of candidates this upcoming offseason. But I just have more faith in the Eagles replacing Steichen than I do Gannon. Because what does Sirianni know about defense? He goes hands off to begin with anyway. He turns it over to Gannon. It's kind of like Dougie P with Schwartz. The defense is on you, big guy. So I just think it would leave a little bit of a bigger hole with the Eagles coaching staff overall. All right, John, the fact that Doug comes back here with a little momentum himself, with the team playing well, Doug's a bit of an emotional guy. Always was, always has been. I think that's one of the reasons why Philadelphia liked him as much when he was here, including winning that big game in February a couple of years ago. I think that contributed to it as well.
Yeah.
Emotions get the better of Doug Peterson this week?
I guess I would ask in what way? Like, how would, like, in terms of trying to be too aggressive with play calling, and in terms of trying to, I don't know, try to do too much. It's
Eagles do what they do. They score their first two possessions. They're down 10-0. Well, of course, they're going to defer, so that means Jacksonville will have had two possessions. But before you know it, they're down 10-0. Does he go, I can't get embarrassed here. These are my peeps here in Philadelphia. Maybe push the envelope a little too much on the offensive side. If the opposition were someone else, he might do it differently.
It's possible. It's possible. I would lean towards him not going in that direction, but not a whole lot. I think Peterson, I know he can be emotional, but I can't recall a lot of times where I remember him as the head coach game calling too emotionally.
He went for it a lot on fourth down when he was here.
He did. And I guess that's a good way that it would manifest itself, to your point. If he's taking some fourth down chances that even for Doug Peterson would be a little too much, then I think you could see that. I will say no for right now, but
okay.
It just slightly on the other 50 side of that 50-50 coin there.
Yeah, that's our boy Ryan Paganetti, Jody. He's going to be in the ear,
whispering those analytics in his ear.
Given those fourth down conversions, I think the Eagles are going to be very aggressive if they're in plus territory on fourth down. They always are, and they should be, and that's sort of, something that has been borne out, and I think a lot more teams are going in that direction. And Doug Peterson was at the forefront of that. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. But I want to put you in Mike Caldwell's seat, John Stolnis, because I've been trying to figure this out. And for those who don't know, Jim Caldwell, I'm sorry, the defensive coordinator. I'm mixing up the names. Either way, the old Eagles linebacker is the Jags defensive coordinator. I've been saying this about defensive coordinators. If I were a defensive coordinator, what's your game plan to stop? Where do you start on this Eagles offense? What do you try to take away?
Yeah, and that's the key. What are you taking away? Before, it used to be to take away the running game. I don't think you can do that anymore. I think what you're looking to do is try and take away A.J. Brown. And what you're trying to do is, with your linebackers, bottle up Jalen Hurts so that he's not making plays outside the pocket. And I know Jalen Hurts has made a ton of plays from inside the pocket. He's looked like a completely different quarterback through the first 3 weeks of the season. I still think that has to be your game plan, though. And Caldwell was the linebackers coach for Tampa last year in the playoffs, and they did a great job bottling up Jalen Hurts.
Yeah,
but
it's a good point.
I think he's a different quarterback right now. Jalen Hurts was looking to run at the first sign of trouble last year. I think if I'm I think if I'm Jacksonville, I'm blitzing a lot. I think I'm trying to see what I can get away with blitzing early. See if I can get Jalen Hurts throwing off his back foot. Trying to play contain with my edge rushers on the outsides to keep him from leaking out. And blitzing my linebackers, every third play or something like that. A heavy blitzing scheme to see if that rattles Jalen Hurts and gets him kind of off to a bad start. That's dangerous, of course, because you've got Goddard in the middle of the field. You've got Brown in the middle of the field. You have Quez Watkins, who can stretch the defense and take some of those guys out of the middle of the field. The Eagles have an answer for whatever a defense would want to do if they're executing. But I would, if I'm Caldwell, I'm erring on the side of aggression and seeing if I can get Jalen Hurts to get a little bit rattled in this game.
All right. I know all of us have, and when I say all of us, I mean the 300 change people streaming in right now. You, me, John. I got John and John with me. The the last 24 hours, no matter what you were doing, no matter how hard you're working, at some point you got to take some time and watch what's happening down in Florida and the havoc that Hurricane Ian is wreaking over the entire state. John has mentioned a couple times over the last couple of days, well, it's human nature that the Eagles take their foot off the gas, that's why they're not scoring points in the second half. And he may be right. Is it not human nature for the Jaguars while playing this game on Sunday to be wondering, what does my house look like? Are my family and friends okay down there in Florida? It's been a nasty storm that we've had to deal with here in America. And shoot, we're dealing with it just by watching it and staying on top of it, staying in touch with friends or family members that are down there. The Eagles, and I apologize if this is an insensitive question, the Eagles gain an advantage because the Jaguars are coming up from a state that have had to deal with Hurricane Ian this week?
It's a fair question, and I think that's certainly a possibility. There could be the death toll in Florida. I just saw this morning. I think they're saying like hundreds could be dead from this hurricane, and so I think that could certainly be playing into members of the Jaguars and their coaching staff and family and all that. If there's any, I would say if there's a head coach that can kind of have their team mentally prepared to play a game on Sunday, it's Doug Peterson. I think he's an emotionally mature guy. I think he'll have everybody's priorities in the right spot. I think he's a guy who will help them balance the concerns of their family members and their personal lives and their property and all of those different things that go along with being in the eye of a hurricane and getting ready to play a football game on Sunday afternoon. So I don't think it'll be a tremendous amount, but you have to account for the human factor in everything having to do with sports. The game is not played on paper, and that is, these are human beings and dealing with a very human situation.
Yeah, and Tony Khan, one of the owners of the Jags, is already in town because his wrestling promotion was at the Liacouras Center last night, and he had already said anybody who was living in Florida didn't have to travel to the show if they were concerned about their family and friends. So it is one of those things that people don't think about. And I mean, there are real life problems that come into players are real people. And I don't think enough people realize that at times. But at John Stolnis on Twitter, follow John there. Read him at Bleeding Green. Listen to him at Bleeding Green. Phillies making a run towards the playoffs. Not great. Not putting up the good fight, but you can listen to John at the good fight as well. PH for the Phillies. Are they going to make it, John? We'll end it there.
Oh man, if you'd asked me last week, I would have said absolutely. They're collapsing again. I can't believe they're doing it again. I can't believe they're doing it again, guys. And I don't know that they have. They looked last night like they were terrified. They looked like deer in headlights at the plate. They looked like they were pressing. They did not look like a confident, relaxed baseball team last night. They looked like they could feel a collapse coming, and they're on the road. And this weekend in DC, the weather, with you're talking about Ian, they might have to play 2 doubleheaders this weekend, but on different days. Things are not lining up in a good way for this team. So my instinct right now is no, which is just unfathomable because I really did think they were a shoo-in.
Ouch. All right, I'm going to give you back to football final over-under. I do this often when we have guests on. If not, ask them to pick a score on an upcoming Eagle game. Give us an over-under. Mm-hmm. Trevor Lawrence, 300 yards, 299, over or under?
I'll say under.
Really?
Yeah, I'll say under.
I'll say over, and it's not a bad thing. I believe there were 7 quarterbacks in the National Football League that threw for 300 yards last week. 6 of them lost. The only one who didn't lose was a guy by the name of Jalen Hurts here in Philadelphia.
Sometimes he won. Put it up to 400, Jody. If he's got 400, they're going to lose.
No, I wanted to make Stolnis think. Yeah, that's why I said it at 300. Johnny, great stuff. Appreciate you hopping on board with us. We'll be calling again in a couple of weeks. Thanks for joining us today.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
John.